It's your girl, Ella Shawn, Southern erotic author of the Broken Soul series, host and unlicensed therapist of the Black Writer Therapy Podcast, a show dedicated to amplifying the voices, stories, and experiences of Black women writers with the audacity to thrive in an industry that hasn't always been so welcoming. Join me as I welcome a new writer friend every Thursday at 7:30 a.m. for candid conversations about writing, publishing, and finding harmony in their writing lives. You can stay in the know by following the podcast on Instagram and TikTok. Feel free to message me on either platform. I love hearing from my listeners. And if you like what you hear and would like to support the show, you can recommend this podcast to family and friends, leave a rating and or a review. Become a paid subscriber to the How Are You Healing Sis newsletter on Substack. Or you can join my Sunrise Tea crew by gifting me a box of my favorite tea. Welcome to this session of Black Writer Therapy. I wonder who's in my waiting room today.
Well, Ella, today you have Dr. Michele Boyd in your waiting room. Dr. Boyd is the founder of Inkwell Academic Writing Retreats and author of the insightful book, Becoming the Writer You Already Are. Today, she's here to discuss the importance of finding balance between work and personal life, the emotional weight of becoming an academic, and how to create a supportive network, especially if you're a minority in a PWI academic setting. Dr. Michele Boyd, Ella will see you now.
So welcome to Black Writer Therapy.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for agreeing to come on. I know we've been going back and forth for a year, and I'm just really excited to have you on as my first academic. I feel like you are elevating my show by being here. Not
haven't even heard my potty mouth yet, but that's okay. I appreciate you starting there.
Yeah, you know what your potty mouth means? It means that you are not a liar. I trust folk with the potty mouth. It's those people who are censoring themselves constantly.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I hear you.
So, what made you leave academia?
I think the short version is I was a little burnt out after getting tenure. I didn't know that exactly. I used that phrase without really fully understanding what it meant, and then found out it was probably true. It's hard to get tenure. And I was in an environment where I had the most support a person could imagine. I'm trained as a political scientist, but I had a 100% position in African-American studies. I had the most amazing, supportive, colleagues who were friends, who were great mentors, who I still count on and rely on today, and who were just also very inspiring. They were the kind of scholar I wanted to be. And I mention this because often when people hear that someone left academia after being successful, they think that there was, some kind of tension or hostility. And it wasn't that. But I was tired. And I was tired. And I think I was also struggling with a lot of anxiety around teaching, a lot of anxiety around writing. I was just doing a lot of reading about writing, the craft of writing. Even though academics are not typically interested in that, I was really interested in it. I was interested in storytelling and how scholars can use storytelling to communicate complicated ideas. And I was doing a lot of reading about writing. And I also started reading about writing process and found out that there was quite a deep literature, especially among cognitive psychologists, that describes what writing is and why it's so difficult and the things that get in our way and what we can do about them. And I was delighted to see that I wasn't the only person who felt this anxiety. So I was doing all of this, diving into writing and what we know about it. And I was part of a research institute that decided to offer writing retreats for graduate students. I offered to actually just talk to the students about what their experience was when they were writing, just checking. And I did this the first time and I was totally hooked. And then the months would pass and they would come back to me and they'd say, hey, that thing that you suggested to me, I tried it out and it really worked. And so I was floored by that, because it turns out that's not what happened, that there was something else happening in a retreat setting. So this honestly just got to the point where it was more interesting for me to do that than it was for me to do my job.
That part.
Yeah. Yeah, I really loved it. And I could see that I had some skill, and I could see that the things that I was talking with people about, which turned out to be about their fears.
Mm-hmm.
That's how that happened. I did this thing. I fell in love with it. I had the opportunity to do it at my university. And then I realized, hey, maybe I could actually do this outside of the university. And that's what happened.
Hello, Inkwell. I love all of that, because I think, speaking from a former educator, because I taught high school for 15 years and I taught English, and most of those classes were creative writing. And when you were talking about how you felt like, oh, wait, I thought it was going to be this one thing, but it turned out that they were really getting something more. That feeling is so addictive. It's so addictive when your students are like, oh yeah, this is more than me learning to write. It is me learning myself through my writing. And that's, goosebumps, I did the thing. Yeah, that's why I was just sitting here like nodding. Yeah, it's that hard. That's beautiful. I love that. And for you to be able to translate that over into academic writing.
I will tell you that the retreats that I run have nothing to do with the content of people's writing. I actually don't talk about that. And if someone wants to talk to me about the substance of their writing, I will often very gently steer them away from that, because what we do focus on is those fears that get in the way and how they keep us from sitting down to do the work. So sometimes talking about the substance of the work can be a little bit of a substitute for us getting into what the real issue is there. Yeah. However, I will say that one of the things that I've learned over the how many ever years it's been since I started leading retreat, I guess it's 12 years now, is that the way that storytelling comes in to what we do at Inkwell is, I find that one of the ways we can get caught in our fears is through constant storytelling about our incapacity. And when I say that, I want to be very clear that I am not saying that if you just don't say negative things to yourself, then you won't have any writing barriers. I'm not saying that at all, because I'm a political scientist. I was trained as a political scientist, so I also understand and really talk at length in the book about how we come to those narratives because we're in a context that does not support writing, and that actually undermines writing, and that actually undermines it in particular ways for people of color. I just want to be clear. I'm saying the narratives that we get hooked on are important. So we do talk about storytelling in that way, but I am not saying it's all our fault. If we would just be positive, we wouldn't have any problems. Not saying that at all.
No, and I think that's important that you make that distinction, and just to touch on people of color. And I am particularly interested in women of color in academia, and I'll tell you why.
Tell me.
I have a daughter who is brilliant, and she went to Mount Holyoke and graduated in 3 years.
Wow.
Magna cum laude with her thesis.
Yeah.
She has this beautiful way of writing, and it doesn't fit that standard academic mold. And she was so frustrated throughout the whole process. She was just getting ready. And thankfully, it all worked out. But just knowing that experience really did discourage her from like going further.
Yeah.
Just like into academia. And I know that there are a lot of young Black women who are brilliant and who would really like change the world the further they went into academia. But you get these kind of, can you speak to that?
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely think this is a struggle, right? Because there is a way that there is a mold, right? You're an English teacher, so you know that when we teach, when we're talking about writing, there's a certain genre, there's certain conventions that we want people to follow. There's ways that and being able to identify that genre. And I'm saying this for academics too. typically talk about scholarship and fitting into any kind of genre, but it does. So we have to learn the conventions, right? And we have to learn how to put arguments together. And of course, there's some of that it's not only is it acceptable to require it of our students, but we definitely want students of color to be able to completely master it, right? Because we know that there are other points on which they are going to be sort of misunderstood or assumed not to be competent. So we want to teach those things. And also, it's the case, and we have literature, this is not just my personal opinion, but we have literature that shows that there are ways that people make assumptions about the capacity of the individual that aren't based on the writing. Or we know that, for example, people who are women of color and people who are not women of color can do the same kinds of work. They can, for example, there's some work that shows that it's a little bit off what you're saying, but that shows when women of color academics, maybe it was women, I can't remember, publish an article where they're joint authors, and we look at how that work is assessed as opposed to men who publish work with joint authors. The men are given more credit and are seem to have taken a larger role, whereas the women it counts less, right? So we know that there are all these forms of bias. When people speak in a certain way, we understand that the same example, the same mistake made by that person, as opposed to the same mistake in a grammar error or something, sentence construction, by someone else who doesn't have an accent or doesn't have English as a second language, those things are misunderstood differently. So I guess what I'm saying is that is something that it's not just this feeling that people of color have. Exactly. There is some research behind it that shows that, yes, there is the bias. I'm trying to navigate that line between getting the good mentorship you need to learn, hey, this is the typical way books do it, and it sounds boring, but you got to learn it. And the bias that can come with that is very difficult. And thank goodness we have so much work that lays out for us that this is not in your head, honey. It's not in your head. It's happening. And that's why it's so important to have other scholars, other professors who are people of color, to be in a cohort of students who are people of color so that you can have that support and community that helps you through what we know are still instances of bias in all levels of academia.
Yeah, indeed. And so thank you for speaking to that, because it's just, I think it's really difficult, especially, and I couldn't imagine like for, say, a parent or a partner who doesn't have any experience in the collegiate world, and then having to try and be like that support. But what do you do, right? Because how do you touch that? And so I think, just having that, and that's difficult to find as well, especially when you're attending PWIs, and it's just, where's my community? I'm having a difficult time.
Yeah, and I think your community is everything in these instances, both your community of peers, so having students who are going through the same experiences as you, and also having a group that you feel like you belong to, where you're not an outsider, but also your community of advisors and teachers and teaching assistants and even administrators who are providing student support services. That's so important in the experience of any person trying to write, at any level trying to write.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So is that a part of what you do at Inkwell, is providing that kind of community that like lends itself to a soft space to fall when you fall, because you're going to fall?
Yeah, I would say that is probably the primary thing that makes retreats so powerful. And they're the reason why I teach through retreats, right? Because there are lots of environments in which I could teach the material that I teach. I could just give a workshop, right? And that's one way of learning. But what I have seen and what the research confirms for us is that when we have a community of people, we call it a community of practice. So a group of people who are learning together, who provide support for one another. Yeah, it's a great concept, community of practice. So when we have that group of people who we can trust and rely on, when we have the opportunity to learn specific strategies, so that's why we provide workshops every day in the retreat on specific moments in a writing session that are challenging. And when we provide the opportunity to actually practice the skill that you are learning over and over again, what that does is not only build the skill, that's one thing we're trying to do, is build the skill of managing the difficult moments in a writing session, but also build trust. I think this is the component that maybe I don't hear so much from other scholars. And that is really important when you're working with scholars who are feeling fear and self-doubt and overwhelmed. It's not just the skill, the technical skill that we're teaching, but it is the skill of being overwhelmed by your feelings, being terrified to sit down and write, latching onto a strategy, a form of support, practicing that feeling of being uncomfortable and moving through it anyway. And then seeing, oh, wow, I can actually do this. Okay, I did it on Monday in the morning. I'm going to try it on Monday in the afternoon, and then I'm going to do it on Tuesday in the afternoon. And it doesn't sound, even for me, after all this time, it's still amazing that after a week of doing that all day long, people have an embodied experience of trusting themselves in their process in a way that they, and that's partly skill. It is skill, but it's also just the experience of seeing, hey, I can actually do this. Hey, there are a bunch of other people around me who are similarly struggling through this. And hey, look, they did it. And hey, also they fell down in the middle and just like I did, and struggling through something together build your capacity to use the skill, builds your understanding of your own writing process. But most importantly, it builds your trust in yourself, which is, those are the things together that move people in a more sustained way past their fears and keep them from getting stuck. So
You're saying all the great things. You're saying things that make an educator, a mentor, a great educator and mentor. Just knowing that when people you're instructing or whatever the case is, knowing that it's not an issue of ability, but it really does boil down to an issue of trust, and not trusting you or the system, but self. Like the fact that is where you, I think, I don't know, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it feels to me that Inkwell is built on that kind of foundational principle of, let's make sure they can go out in the world trusting who they are, trusting that they are good enough to be great. That was what I wrote on my board every day. Trust yourself to know that you are good enough to be great.
The criticism I'm about to make, which is one that I say as someone who still loves many parts of the academic life. And that is that the model for teaching in graduate education is apprenticeship. You somehow figure out what's happening when you first come to grad school, unless you have really been socialized into this, but you somehow figure out how you're going to find this one person whose field is similar to the thing that you're interested in, and you build a relationship with them. And it's that primary relationship through which you learn what you need to learn in order to be successful. And of course, it's not that you only have this one person, but you have a dissertation advisor. Your sort of work is centered around your relationship with this one person. If you're lucky, like me, and you have a mentor who was kind and smart and supportive, that's great. If you didn't get that, and you don't even really realize what's happening, you're screwed. And I don't think the apprenticeship model in general does a great job of teaching scholars this other set of skills that we need, which is take risks. Say things that are maybe no one else said, or say it in a different way, and really trust yourself to go out on the limb. But honestly, when you are writing, ideally, our heads are not filled with the voices of critics as we're trying to even figure out what we think, and that's what we're looking for.
Like one little component, taking risks. I've given writing workshops, and I'm like, when you're starting this writing process, start you. Start way out where everybody else is. There's nothing out there, nothing to see. You go out there and see what it is. And then
Right.
that way you have so much to whittle down. But then
Absolutely.
you've been out there flying and saw, okay, it's really horse hockey. The apprenticeship model, that's what this is
Yeah.
about, where
Yeah.
you're meant to emulate your apprentice or
Yeah.
what is it?
Your
mentor.
Yeah. You say it so much better than I did. Yes, you're meant to emulate your mentor.
Yeah. Okay. Not really, but I'm going to take it because guess what? I'm going to take it because you gave it. So thank you very much.
Look.
But yes. And then so when this doesn't work, because you have people who are like, that emulate what you're doing. And I have a different way of approaching it. I think that's like the dichotomy that breaks so many people and pulls them out of academia. And then we're missing all these great minds and great theories and great all that.
And that's where I think other forms of community come in. So the apprenticeship system, I'm not saying we should toss it out. I'm saying we want to augment it so that, and again, these are things that people who study this far more deeply than I know. When you're part of a cohort of students who you feel that you belong to and feel supported by, you're much more likely to be successful as you go through school. And I want to say that's true at every level of education. I think that's true. It's okay that you have a mentor who maybe does things a little different from you and you want to branch out. If you can have these extra layers of support, then you learn how to do that the right way, right? They're still your mentor, but you learn how to take risks in your own thinking and in your own writing outside of them. You develop relationships with other professors or wherever that community is, you develop a community of writing companions who look at your work and say, yes, this is fabulous, keep going, or we tweak this part right here and then keep going. So that's where community comes in to augment.
I love that. I just, again, all the great things. And I haven't even asked my favorite question yet. And we haven't brought up this amazing book yet because this is what happened. But I have to ask you.
Yes.
Because this is Black Writer Therapy.
Yes.
Not that I am a licensed therapist by any stretch of the imagination. However,
I understand. Yeah.
I play one on my podcast.
Okay.
So, Michele, how are you healing today?
One, I'm experimenting this week with working only 4 hours a day. The reason I'm telling you this is because I used to be really ashamed that I only wanted to work 4 hours a day. And now, because I actually, for reasons I'm happy to go into if you want to know, I feel pretty good about 4 hours a day. I wish no one had to work more than 4 hours a day if they didn't want to.
Agreed.
Now, I'm not able to only work 4 hours a day, but shooting for 4 keeps it from being 7, 8, 9, 10. Be doing that. That's one thing. And I want to say that I know that when people hear that they might think, oh, that's so great. It's so wonderful. She's so amazing. You know what? It's a struggle. I always want to work longer. I always get frustrated. So I don't want to make it sound pretty at all. So that's one thing I'm doing. But what it does is it requires me to engage every minute of the day with what's the most important thing right now. And is it going to hurt my body to sit in this chair for another 45 minutes? It's at that level, right?
Yes.
Okay. So that's one thing. Second thing, not doing it today, but doing it this weekend. I'm going to give a workshop at the Pennsylvania State University. I'm so excited about it. I love to coach so much that I can't wait to go. And then afterwards, I'm having a girls' weekend with my 3 best women friends from college. And I went to Hampton. So we're about to have a little Hampton reunion over the weekend after that workshop. And I say that because this is an example of 2 of those women I never even see except 1 or 2 times a year. And yet when we get together, it's literally like we're sophomores in college again. So those are, you can't make new old friends. And those are women who I can rely on for anything at any time. And being with people you love, and in this instance for me, being with other Black women who have known me for 20 some odd years. Yeah. I don't even have to do anything. They're going to do all the healing. And I'll say one of them is really great. I would say that she is the person who has really taught me that you have to actively commit to cultivating and maintaining your friendships with other women. Yeah. So that's the second thing. And then after that, because where this is happening is near my parents, I am going to, because we live in that remote life, I'm going to go spend the week with my mom and dad. and just work from home and be with them and do the little chores they need me to do. And my mom and I are going to the spa. My dad gave it to her as a Christmas present. We're going to fourth season. Yeah, we are going to the fourth season.
Look, I'm so glad people are looking at my face because look, I'm just all over the place. I'm like,
Yeah.
And now,
Yeah.
job.
Yeah, so I'm being with my people in 3 different ways, like doing professional work that I really love, where I feel like I get more from coaching other people than they get from me, being with my girlfriends, and then being with my parents. So that's how I'm healing today and for the rest of the week.
Man, you know what? I'm going to give it up for you because that whole idea of working 4 hours a day, just let me share this with you, Miss Michele.
Please do.
I sit down, right? I sit down and I say,
Yeah.
I have this dice, this one little, and I shake them and I say, oh, I have a 60 minutes to this project. And then, good job. Yeah. I say, I do all of this.
Yeah.
And 10 hours later,
yeah,
my legs are swollen.
Yeah.
Right? And I haven't eaten anything. And I only had the 1 cup of tea.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting here bleary-eyed and crazy trying to figure out what's going on. And why is there no one up? Oh, because it's 1 o'clock in the morning. And what are you doing? And I try so hard to really, but then it's absolutely love everything I do.
Yeah. Yeah.
But also, it doesn't love me back because it costs to be that passionate and that involved in and I don't even call it work, but in this that I've chosen. So I'm looking at you, and so 4 hours a day, and I would never be embarrassed because I would love to because it makes you say, I have 4 hours.
Yeah.
Only 4 hours, which means I'm going to be very strategic in what I'm doing, and I'm going to be very focused. So I'm going to steal that once I get settled in my new city digs, I think. Yeah. Because now I'm not far from anything. I won't be far from any of the things I love doing because everything's downtown. So I think I'm going to steal your 4-hour workday. I'm so curious.
I love that. Can I ask you a question, Ella? Because one of the things I've noticed is that the category of a person who is really good at doing this, what you just described, which is really prioritizing minimal periods of time, are new moms. And I know that you have 3 girls. And so I'm wondering, what did you have a strategy that you used when any of your kids were young and you needed to get something done and you got that little precious 30 or 45 minute when they were down for a nap and the other ones were otherwise engaged? Because I find that people actually have whatever they need in order to do really difficult things like prioritize those short periods of time. So I'm wondering did you ever have that and what were you able to do?
I went to grad school and I had 1 kid and I was pregnant with one. A very difficult pregnancy. And I was in grad school. And so I'm going to tell you the truth. I don't know how I did what I did. Most of me thinks it was survivor mode.
Yeah.
And it was really just a matter of making it a priority, making my study, making my research, making all of it a priority. But when you don't necessarily have to make things a priority.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like I was paying for grad school. And so, okay. And I had these kids in the house and all the other crazy trappings of suburbia. But I was also being held accountable by my cohort and of course my kids, right? Had to, but when it's just like me, I'm a writer, I'm a podcaster, I do other little side things, and it's just me who's supposedly holding me accountable. So then it's, where's the priority? And I can put priority everywhere except for, I think where it needs to start is with me. Because I know most people don't put priority on self.
Yeah. Yeah. And I just want to say, I hear that a lot. So I think everybody struggles with that. I struggle with it. I hear it a lot from other people. And I think it's easy to feel like that's a flaw. And I don't necessarily think of it that way. I think it's just a condition that we have to figure out how to manage, but that it's not, we haven't done anything wrong.
Yeah. And I look at it and I think maybe it's because of like, we live in a society that pushes that. From the time a kid is like 4 years old, they're in preschool for 7 to 8 hours a day if they're not in half day. And so from pre-K all the way to 12th grade, you are being conditioned to be someplace for 8 hours and then do after school activities and then go home and do homework. And then because it's a condition that says this is what life is all about, right? You do the work, you sit, you do the that. And so it's really hard to turn that switch and say, wait a minute, it's not about this. This doesn't make sense. And it's not healthy. So I think just being in that space, and like for me, when I quit working, God, I think that was like maybe 10 years ago, after I developed lupus, and I was going to continue to work, but my husband wrote my resignation letter and said, I need you more than I need a paycheck. So bring it home. Right? Like looking good. It was not looking good. And so after I got all of that together, and I was like, gosh, what am I going to do with myself? Because I've been working since I was 15. What am I going to do with myself? Right? And just giving myself enough grace to be still and figure it all out. That was like a game changer. But then, of course, I figured it out. And then I just fell right back into the same groove. And so I love that, experimenting with working a 4-hour day. Like that makes so much sense. Because why am I like pushing myself?
Yeah. It's hard. It's both resisting. I do think there's a difference between having it required externally and also wanting to do it out of love of something, right? They're both bad. They can both go to a place where we're not caring for ourselves, but when we're caught in the middle of those two things, that's very hard.
Yeah, completely agree. You're going to have a great weekend.
I am. Thank you.
You really are. Like, yes. I'm going to hop right here on this girlfriend thing. You've had friends that you've been friends with for like the last 20 years, you said. 20-something years.
I want to say, I'm not great at on the fly math, but probably that's around 30 now, actually, because I'm 53 and we went to college together. So that was 30 years. Yeah.
And when I say Black don't crack, and if you treat Black, it will treat you well back. I wish I could see this woman. She like real gorgeous, like for real. I love it. I love to see it. I love to hear it. Okay. The girlfriend thing. I'm going to be, look, I'm coming back. I think I get more therapy out of here than invested. But because there's a space where your work friends are your friends because you spend more time at work.
Yeah.
The moment I left work, and then, of course, a disorder like lupus, you never know when you're going to be able to go someplace. So it's like really weird to make plans, and it's just really weird. But all of my girlfriends that I thought were my ride or die partners died off, right? They just, they died off. And so for a long time, I was just out here doing my thing, living La Vida Loca without my village of women friends. And I can completely tell you how miserable that is. I didn't even realize how much I need the company of women folk. Because, okay, the husband can't be everything. Your kids can't be everything. And I didn't realize how much I got from those relationships and how much they impacted my creativity, my sense of self, my sense of safety, like just feeling safe within my womanhood. I didn't realize how much I needed my girlfriend, right? To be this person that I've always been. And so I'm really happy to hear you say that you've had these friends for so long. And so how much does that relationship play into what you try to offer at Inkwell?
I think a couple of ways. One, my dad was in the Navy, and so we moved around a lot when I was younger. And so I, without realizing it, had this tendency to not necessarily keep up with people when we left a place, because when I was younger, we left, it was, first of all, it was before the internet. And so you couldn't really keep in touch in the same way. And I spent part of my childhood in Yokohama in Japan, and we spent some time in Hawaii. So you really did leave, right? You weren't
Yeah.
I remember sending letters to my friends as a little girl once we left Hawaii, because that was how you kept in touch. And so I think I've actually, without realizing it, had this orientation that once something was over, once you moved away, there wasn't really a way to stay in touch with people. And so to have that girlfriend articulate in my 20s that it's like an ethos, it's like part of how she understands. And life was really helpful to me, I think. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that having somebody name something helps you see what's your relationship to that thing that they are talking about. And I think we all need other people sometimes to help us to reflect back to us something about our lives or something about the context that we're in so that we can see it more clearly. And being part of a community, that's part of what you get when you're writing in a community instead of writing alone. And we do a lot of our writing alone.
Oh, yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just that if you're struggling with something, that's one of those moments where you really want to have 1 or 2 or 4 or 6 people who you can connect with, who you trust. And I know I'm harping on the word trust, but that really does matter, because often graduate students will feel like, oh, I should go to my advisor. And junior faculty members will think, oh, I should find out the person who's the top in their field and ask for their advice. And those things are really great. And also you need people who you can show your crap to. And and you don't do that to people who you don't trust. And so my college girlfriends, and I have a similar group of women friends from graduate school, I can do and say and show them anything as a human being and as a writer. There's no separation. And I would say I even have people like that I'm very lucky, from my time as a faculty member. And so figuring out who you trust, figuring out who your people are, and then distinguishing them from who your mentors are or who the people you really admire are. And maybe those two groups will sometimes be the same person, include the same people, but it's okay if they don't. That's all right.
Yeah. I love that. Yeah. The reflection part, just having that mirror. I always look for that. I need people to show me my blind spots, because obviously I'm not going to see them. And I need people who are honest and confident enough in themselves that whatever they see in me isn't going to be like, oh, I don't want to. Because you find that a lot, I think, especially like within women in your girlfriend group. So great weekend. We're going to work on a 4-hour day. And now we get to talk about becoming the writer you already are. I love that title, right? Because it's just like, when I looked at it, I said, wait a minute, because I never read blurbs. I never read them. And so I'm looking at this and I'm like, becoming the writer you already are. I love that, because you've already spoken into existence what is, right? Not what might be, or not. No, we're just going to pull what's in you out.
Yeah.
Why was that? Did you choose this title, or did your publisher?
I chose the title, and I wasn't sure about it at first. It's not pithy, and I like pithy. I like concise. To tell that in this book, my writing has changed a little bit, but I did choose the title, and it was because of what I had seen as a faculty member and as a coach, and what I was referring to in the book, which is people have a writing process that works for them. They might not know all of its dimensions, but they have things that they know work for them. And it's often the case as part of this apprenticeship system, as part of going through graduate school and getting an academic job and trying to get tenure, that you forget those things. You lose access to them. And then what do we do? Because we're scholars and we appreciate and value the bodies of knowledge that already exist, we go outside ourselves and look for answers. And then when those things don't work, we feel badly about ourselves. And so what I wanted to say is, you're already a writer. I'm not going to teach you anything you don't already know, but what I would love to talk with you about is what are those things that are already a part of who you are as a writer that have been there for a really long time that you can count on, that you can excavate, that you can get to know better. You might augment them with some work with a coach, but let's start with the stuff you already know how to do because you're already amazing. That's what that title is about.
Wow. I really want to come to your retreat, but
Come on.
I'm not writing anything scholarly. I'm completely fiction here. But man, I feel warm. I feel warm.
Yeah.
And I think that's to be an academic and go into a space where you're made to feel that warmth and acceptance without even having to do anything up front. Now, again, I am not in academia, okay? But I feel like it tends to be a little cold and austere. When you're in it and you're trying to like go through all the little hoops and get that tenure, I feel like it's definitely not, hey.
No, I think that's a fair assessment. And that's what I was hoping that people would feel from the title, from what's inside the book, that it's okay to have feel that sense of warmth towards yourself, to cultivate it with other people. It's not contradictory to what happens in academia. Writing is not just an intellectual task. It has an emotional component to it. And when we attend to that emotional component, we strengthen our capacity for thinking and we strengthen the quality of the ideas that we generate, which is what academia is supposed to be committed to.
I mean, look, because why put it out there? And I'm going to ask this question 11 times. Why put it out there if it's not accessible to people that it can help? I read articles. I do a lot of research for my writing. I'm like, look, even if I'm writing fiction, I'm not going to put just my willy-nilly thoughts out there. It's important to do the research. And so like I'm researching and I just read a lot of stuff because I'm a nerd. And I'm like, and I want to be able to read it and not have to have like a whole set of reference books. And you just give me this information in a way that makes sense to the everyday person and not dumb it down, because that kind of sounds but accessibility is important. And I think having, or even you giving these scholars permission to tap into their emotions as they're working through this intellectual endeavor is huge. Because you can read stuff and say, okay, this is like really robotic and very that. And then you read some academic work and it's like full and robust. And it's the difference between a flat character and a fully realized character.
Yeah, I never thought about it that way. And it's interesting. What did you just said? Give people the opportunity to access their feelings, which I think it does happen in our retreats, right? That's what I'm saying. But I think, though, I would tweak that statement to say that people are already experiencing their feelings when they're writing. It's just that they're experiencing the ones that terrify them.
Yeah.
Right. And so what I want to really invite people to do is recognize that they feel whatever they feel. Maybe you don't feel terrified. Maybe you just feel doubtful or feel trepidation or whatever that feeling is. And then acknowledge that happening, not feel shame about it. And then think through what works for you to write with that feeling. I think of it as this little creature who's sitting beside you on your chair, right? You have to scooch over for them a little bit, but you keep writing. You just keep writing. And I don't mean that you dismiss the feeling. I don't mean that you ignore it, and find strategy so that you can, I like to say, be comfortable with discomfort, right? Learning to be comfortable with the discomfort.
I love that.
And when you know how to feel the discomfort, be comfortable with it enough so that you can dive into your writing. Part of what will happen if you are able to follow your process is often you will fall into a sense of flow, which will make those feelings drop away.
Yeah.
And so we talk a lot about that. That's what I teach on the first day of the retreat. Is what's one thing we can do? There's no coach is going to tell you things that work for everybody all the time. So what's one thing that we can do to start our writing session in a way that encourages flow instead of what we tend to do, which is to emphasize the things that actually stymie flow. So we worry about the project instead of the larger project. We've got 5 years of work left on this manuscript, but we're trying to finish it in this 45-minute session. Or what are the other things that you have to, where you got to get from the grocery store, or how what you're saying actually is just the same thing as what Ella Sean was saying. So you can't write that because it's already been written. All these things that you have in your head, that we have in our head, keep us from falling into flow. So what are some of the things that we can do that take away what prevents us, the things in our physical environment, things in our social environment, things in our mental space that keep us from dropping into flow, and instead encourage that? And that's not dealing with your feelings. It's recognizing whatever the feeling is and working through alongside with that feeling.
Yeah, I'm going to liken that to, and I know it's going to sound completely crazy, but just stick with me here.
Absolutely.
Like I always say, people are in their dark, people say, oh, I want only to be in the light. And I don't want to embrace this darkness that I have, right? And I'm like, dude, there is no light without darkness. And you only have the darkness because it is something that you need. Everything that's in you is what you need to be the very best you. So even those feelings of doubt and all of those feelings that make you feel itchy and weird, like they are there for a reason, and you can't deny them. Look over them. You have to embrace them and be like, okay, what are you trying to teach me? What is it that you're telling me that I need to know? Or what is it that you're trying to show me about myself that I haven't recognized, right? My strength and so forth and so on. And so the fact that you are focusing, like I am just like, come on out. We're mostly academics, but we love any kind of writer. So you just come on out. No, the entire, because it's like, man, the fact that you are so focused on inside, writing from the inside out. That's the natural, I might be lying, I don't know. But it feels to me that is like, how else would you write if you're not starting from here and out? And I know you're going to say academics start here, like we're all in. Really? No, it has to be inside out.
I think, I don't know this to be true, but I think there's a way that we might start that way, right? Where we have moments when we're that way, but if we're in a context that makes that feel risky, then we decrease the number of times that we're going to do that. We're less likely to do that. And so I think, the other thing I would say about that is I work with a lot. Our retreats are not only for women, but most of the people who come are women. When I say most, 99%. And they're not only for people of color, but I would say between 65 and 75% of the people who come are women of color. And that's on purpose. I do things so that it feels like this is a space you want to be without being a space that's only for women of color. And I have lost my train of thought. But I think especially if you're often people who are at our retreats are doing work they can be doing work that's really emotionally draining. Like when you're talking about historical forms of trauma and genocide and contemporary forms of continual, unrelenting sexual, gender, racial violence and subordination, like even just opening your manuscript can feel like a huge lift. And I guess I was thinking of that to go back to your point about writing from the inside out. I do think people start from the inside, right? Whether it's inside emotionally or inside intellectually. And that can be a really heavy lift for them sometimes. And just saying that's okay and that makes sense. And of course, if all you're doing is counting, I don't know, I'm not a scientist, but whatever scientists have in jars and I don't want to say that. Just maybe what the work that you're doing is about some disease that decimated your family or so. I don't mean to disregard people who do work that's not in those areas, but there is a way where some work allows us some kind of separateness and other work does not allow that kind of separateness. And so I agree with you, I think is what I'm saying, that we do all have a basis of starting from the inside, but not everybody feels okay with that. And
Right.
I just want to encourage people to know that's okay and that it's actually helpful for your writing. And I say this as a person who really does not like feelings. I just want to be clear about this. I hate feelings.
A minute. Wait.
I do.
Wait, no, ma'am.
It's
We're
true.
not going to slide over this. Not going to slide over this. Put my therapist hat on.
I do.
Cheryl, you are on the couch. You are feeling.
I do. I'm not a person who I think naturally, if just left to my own devices, feel comfortable feeling them. I don't always feel comfortable expressing them. I run away from them regularly, whether they be negative ones or overwhelming positive ones. And I know it's hard for people who have been in my retreats to believe this, but part of the reason that I started Inkwell is because I myself suffer from the same kind of anxiety about writing that I think the people I work with do, and I still do. And so I don't want to do it. That's what I mean when I say I hate them. I do not want them. It's so hard. It's so hard all the time to be feeling yourself. I just hate it. And yet, the alternative doesn't really seem to be working. Repressing the same feeling doesn't work, and not being aware of them until they spill out onto somebody doesn't really work. And so,
True. So, but I'll tell you, like my doctors tell me, you are a beautiful hot mess. And that's what my doctors always, you beautiful hot mess. I don't want to deal with my feelings. I hate them, but
I have to.
Amazing. That's amazing.
Yeah.
You don't want them.
Thank you. Thank you. I mean, thank you. So let me say that. Thank you. One manifestation of not enjoying your feelings is that you don't take compliments very well. So I've learned to just say thank you.
Yes.
Appreciate that. And also in the same way that I work to have Inkwell be an accepting collective space for intellectual and work and the emotional work it requires, I would not be at the point where I could talk about feelings if it weren't for other people, right? If I weren't supported by other people, if I hadn't been mentored by other people and loved and accepted and all those things. So that happens because of the people who surround us with their love. That's why we can bear all of the very annoying things about feelings that I'd rather have to deal with.
So let me ask you this question. Do you think that because you mentor and you give and pour into a lot of other people who are struggling with feelings, do you think that's helped you kind
100%.
of connect? Yes.
100%. One, I literally do the things I teach other people to do. I don't do all of them because one of the things that we know is that everybody has strengths and weaknesses in their writing process. And so not everyone needs every tool that I offer. And the same is true of me. But I use the things that I coach other people to use because I am an anxious writer. And so, yes, I would say number one, just saying one of the lovely things about being a writing coach is it forces you to give yourself the kind of care that you're asking other people to give themselves because you can't ask other people to do what you're not willing to do. And
yes,
it's helpful in that. Yeah, it's helpful in that way. Two, just doing research to find out, well, what works here teaches you new things. Yep. And then this is something I never feel really able to convince my coaching clients of, but there's very little that's as inspiring as being in a room of 20 or 30 people, mostly women of color, and watching them struggle with something and then watching them support one another so that they can move past that thing. Yeah. Watching people struggle with the things they're most fearful of and come out the other side. First of all, it's a gift that people are willing to trust me with that information that thing is troubling them, their feelings about it. And then that they allow me to walk with them as they move through the process of moving past it. It's really hard for me to convey how humbling it is that people let me do that. And then it's amazing to watch. And I feel really lucky that this is the way that I'm able to earn my living. It's amazing.
Yeah, it's that vulnerability. I think when people step into their own vulnerability, it allows you to step into yours. And there's just kind of, I'm at a loss for words. I want to say symbiosis, but that's not what I'm talking about. The amalgamation of something, like, I don't know what it is, but it becomes truly a collective moment. That's what I'm trying to get to, that kind of collective conscious moment that is so rare, I think, for most of us to experience. And I'm going to go way left, but just stick with me.
I'm here.
Because for me, those moments, that is what I call living, breathing, and being through the erotic, right? That space that is sublime and it stretches time out, and then it speeds it up, and you get to experience it in like 6D, in 6 dimensions. And so when you're talking about it, I was just like, oh, goosebumps, that's the erotic. That's the erotic. Because that's what I go for in life, right? I want every moment to be that moment where I'm experiencing it in slow motion and with a collective, but also it's very personal, very individual, and very much my own thing, but also their joy is my joy, their struggle is my struggle. And it's just like a beautiful experience. And just, whoa, you've just experienced the erotic, right? The spiritual erotic. So that's a beautiful thing to have happen.
Yeah, I love that. And at least for me, if I'm understanding what you're saying, what that happens in the retreats, right? That's something that a retreat setting can bring you even before we get into the writing, right? When we're just talking about the writing in the middle of the workshop, when we're having dinner together, like that, like part of what I hear you naming is that, I think this is what you're saying, tell me if I'm wrong, that sure, the moment where you sit down to write can be that, and also those moments that led you to be able to sit down and write, especially in the form that we do it at Inkwell.
Yes.
That's also an example of that. And those things don't need to be disconnected. They rely on one another.
Right. They flow in and out of each other. And I think that's what I find. And again, I don't know if I feel like I'm interpreting like what I've been reading and what you've been saying and all the stuff I've been looking at about ink. I feel like there's this fluidity. There's fluidity and this kind of, I come in and I'm like this, but I leave and then I have a sense of sukha. I have a sense of ease about me that I'm able to take with me, even though I'm not back at Inkwell. Wherever I am, I can just tell me.
I appreciate this because I think that one of the things that happens is people come to the retreat. I do think they have that experience, at least. And when I say I do think, they tell me, many people tell me that, right? And then there's a moment when you go home. And I think this is a moment, I know this is a moment people are very afraid of because they've had this amazing experience that's apart from their everyday life, as it should be. You can't live in retreat all the time.
That's a shame too. It's a shame.
I know it really is, but it's an important moment because it's actually the moment after the retreat that matters most, because you will totally appreciate this as a teacher. That moment after the retreat is that moment when the scaffolding that you put around the learning of your student falls away a little. And so I always tell them the post-retreat moment is actually, it's a learning moment too. You're out of the retreat setting, but your retreat learning hasn't finished. And so what does happen in that moment is that people stumble and they fall. And they're like, oh my God, I can't believe this. I paid all this money for this retreat and now I'm not doing any writing, blah, 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 blah. And then they remember one tiny thing that they learned at the retreat. Maybe they even run into somebody and that person helps them remember. And then they avoid for a little bit longer. And then they try that thing and they remember, oh my gosh, if I just do this thing, I can get in. And then they remember 2 and 3 and 4 of the things.
Right.
I say that to say that's an important part of the retreat, because that's when that initial sense of trust that gets built in the retreat trust in yourself gets
Mhm.
reinforced in an environment that is not as well supported. And that is when people send me the email that says, I just have to tell you, I avoided I didn't get to my writing because I had all these family delays. I had all these work delays. All these things happened. And then I ran out of ways to avoid my writing. And then I just set my flow goals, right? That's the first thing. I just set my flow goals and I did my ritual. And then boom, I went from the person who last sent me an email like this said, I went from a to-do list to a to-done list in 3 days.
I love it.
Yep. And now the manuscript is on its way. And so I'm just naming that to say, first of all, to be transparent, I'd want to say, of course, people build trust over the course of a week and it's meaningful, but it's not everything.
Right.
And then I do things deliberately to pull the scaffolding away slowly so that they have support for some time after the retreat. And then there comes a moment where that scaffolding is thin or it's non-existent and they stumble and they fall and then they get back up and then that's the magic.
That's it. That's where the work begins, is that stumble, fall, and that choice. Because it is a choice to get up and say, wait a minute, I know things. I've learned things.
That's right.
Yeah. And
it's amazing.
Back into that. I love it. Oh my gosh, you are awesome. You are so freaking awesome. I love it. Because honestly, I find, and I talk to only Black women writers really on my show. Hey, hello. We get it. We have it bad in publishing.
Yeah.
We have it bad in publishing.
Yeah.
And I always put out here this little intentional writing. And you said that that a lot of the people are coming in and they're doing like the heavy work.
Yeah.
And a lot of the writers who've been on the show with their fiction work, and I know for me, that's the stuff I write, is the heavy work, the kind of work that's, oh my God, I think I can't even look at a laptop when I'm done, right? Yeah. I haven't even started writing since I finished my series because it was a lot. And so it's like that decompression has to take place. And that's that intentional, i.e. healing, that healing work. It's a part of the healing process. And so do you find that when you have that 65, 75% women of color academic coming in, that they're dealing with the intentional work, the healing work in their academic pursuits, and that perhaps maybe that, like, how does that play into the I'm stuck?
Yeah. I think it can be its own, I was going to say it can be its own form of stuff. I don't want to say exactly that, but I think what it does is it adds it is one dimension of their particular, one way they can be stuck, right? And not always, like sometimes they've learned how to move through that, but it adds another dimension that they have to deal with that maybe somebody else doesn't have to deal with. And it's not something that they necessarily feel they have a community of people they can go to with, because people aren't going to understand it, or they're going to doubt their quality as a scholar. They're going to assume that the fact that they're having feelings about this at all undermines their scholarly objectivity. And it depends on what your discipline is. And I think what happens it's funny, being a retreat leader means that there's a lot that happens. It's like camp. When I'm tired at the end of the day and I go to bed and they stay up and it's a lot happening.
Oh, no, that's why the camp leader is resting.
It's a lot, but it's good. They're good things. And so I think part of what happens in that setting is that they are surrounded by other people who are reflecting back to them. Not just, we talked about reflecting back earlier, things about what you're experiencing, but there's a kind of reflection that happens when somebody says, oh, I have the same struggle that you do. I have the same problem as you do. Now you see yourself and somebody else. And so they're able to, we don't necessarily need to talk about it in our workshops. It comes up, but it doesn't have to be the only or the primary place where it gets dealt with. But the other thing I love about our retreats, I'm not exactly sure why this happens, is there's a lot of white folks, and the 40 to 30% is still a fair number of white folks. And what I find is that the people who come to the retreat, the people who come to the retreats they know how to hold space for one another. Now, part of that is because I ask them to do it in particular ways. And also, I think people don't come to our retreat. I invite people who feel uncomfortable holding space for other people, for other women, for Black women, for women of color, not to come to Composed. That's the name of our retreat. Not to come to Composed. If that feels weird or funny to you and you don't know what that means, Composed is not the place for you. And I think people self-select into the retreat, and it also creates a space where if you are someone who needs to be silent at that moment and maybe recognize that your contribution is not needed, people know that. And I'm not saying it's only white folks who for whom that is true. It's true for everybody at some point that what they need to do is actually not speak and just listen. But I feel like the people who come to this retreat know how to do that for one another. And I also do a great deal of work to ask them to do it in particular ways, but they come with a certain base level of knowing how to do it.
Yeah.
And this is one of the reasons why I don't want my retreats to be only for people of color, because honestly, I love creating spaces where white people are not the majority. I love it. And I really think this is partly because I'm somebody who, like I said, my dad was in the Navy. We were always the only Black family around. I've spent a lot of time with people who did not look like me. Mm-hmm. And that was terrible in many ways. And it also it taught me a lot, and it was great in many ways. And one of the results of it is I love to be around a lot of different kinds of people all at once.
Yeah.
But I want all of those of us who are together to be the kind of people who know how to be with other people.
Yeah.
So that's a long answer, but yes, I think it does come out and it gets supported. And it gets supported because when you create and hold space in a certain way, it's easier to make those environments so that people can do that on their own when I'm taking my nap or whatever it is I'm doing.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think, definitely knowing, because I went through your website and I'm just like digging around. And I went through and I looked at Composed, and it's just, you would have to be self-aware. I think it's important that you're self-aware, because I've been in situations where we've had everybody and their mama in the same space. But of course, the moment that, say, I say something like, you know what, as a Black woman, da 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 da, and then there is but, just.
Yeah, we don't get that. And it's not just Black people. I want to say this also, right? There are other people of color. It's not.
Oh, yeah.
And so in the same way that as a Black person, you don't necessarily want to hear a certain kind of commentary from somebody who has not had that same experience. We have that around gender. We have that around sexual identity. We have that around immigrant status, like all kinds of things. And my sense, again, a lot goes on to know about, but my sense from people is that space is made. And that space is held. And now that I'm saying this out loud, I wonder if part of what happens is because I ask people to do it as writers for one another, and because I do think people who come are very self-aware, but it also then maybe it's a model for how do I make that space for people when someone is talking who maybe I fully don't understand what it means to be trans, but I'm going to be in the space of listening to you into your personal story in the same way that I'm going to listen to you as a writer, right? In the same way that I'm going to hold your writing struggles, I'm going to hold these other struggles, which largely means I'm going to be silent and nod my head. Yes. That is part of what I ask people to do sometimes when they're interacting with one another as writers. So I hope to the extent that happens, it partly happens because there's a model on the table for you to follow, regardless of what experience is being discussed that needs to be held.
Yeah, that's important. And so it leads me to my little question here.
Yeah.
Why was becoming the writer you already are a cathartic book for you?
Oh, a lot of reasons. I think one is, it took a long time to write. Which really means I spent a long time not writing it. And also it was hard to write a book in a completely different genre and not have any clear guides for what that should look like. So I think the process of just writing something very different from a traditional academic book required me to, I had to let go of and also fully invest in my identity as a scholar and as an academic in order to write this book. And what I mean is, it's not a traditional book, right? It's not dependent upon data that I collected, an independent body of data that I collected. So it's not that. And at the same time, I still use the same standards for evidence with an argument, with a strong argument. How well do I know this body of literature as I was writing this book? And so I both behaved like a scholar, but then was also freed from some of the scholarly conventions. And that was a tough thing to navigate, to juggle both of those things. And it finally made me, I was writing this book as I left academia and started Inkwell. So I was also going through a very
transition.
Yes. Yeah. And it was hard. I still very much identify as someone who's a thinker and a scholar, even though I'm not a faculty member, because you don't have to be a faculty member in order to be a scholar. But that was something I had to give myself. I had to feel, oh, I'm not really a scholar. Oh, I'm not really a thinker. I'm not legit. And then come back and be like, I actually believe that. What does it look like to be a scholar in this fashion, and to infuse your coaching with scholarship, but not so much so that it's no longer coaching? So I just had to get, this book expresses the identity shift that I was going through, the professional identity shift I was going through when I left my faculty position and then started Inkwell. Also, really, the thing that kind of helped me figure out what the structure of this book should be is that I read some really bad article on what the structure of a self-help book was. And actually, that part wasn't bad. The part of the article that was bad, that was the write your book in 30 days part of it.
Oh, yeah.
That part. But I was really embarrassed. I realized, oh, wait, this is the structure I need. But then the idea that I was writing a self-help book for a scholar is really dropped down. But But the thing is, that was the structure I needed. And the thing is, I actually think self-help books, when they're well written, are written in a very pedagogically sound manner, which is, what's the problem? What are some of the solutions you've tried? Here's why they didn't work. Here's another solution I want to offer you. And here's how, let me walk you through it. I think that's a great way to teach, right? But at the time, I was really embarrassed. So it was another way that I had to accept that I wasn't who I had been professionally. And then also, because I did still draw on research literature, I did that in a way that was different than how I had when I was a faculty member, which is, you are so deep in your own literature, all the things, all the years, all the authors, you're just deep in it. And I couldn't get that deep in every single literature because I drew from a lot of them. So it was really scary to have to make claims about what's true without having spent 10 years
proving to yourself that it really is true.
But this is the basic fear that scholars have, right? Oh, I haven't read enough literature. I'm not allowed to say this. And so I was going through everything that I talk about in the book as I was writing the book. And there came a moment when I finally decided this book has to be done. I can't be writing this for the rest of my life. And I had to work through all those fears in a concrete way. And I was able to do it in a way that didn't exhaust me, that didn't burn me out. And then when I was done, I had a very imperfect book that I loved.
Yeah.
And that was not how I felt about my first book at all. Which is understandable. My first book was based on my dissertation. I was a first-time author. There's so many, I was 30-something instead of 50-something, a lot of different things. But it was the going through all those fears, and it was having all those stumbling blocks, and then having on internally to really accept what's great about the book, what the limitations of the book are, and then still love it. I think that's why it was cathartic. And I'll just mention this in case there are any academics who listen to this, because I think it's a really important thing to know about. I had a terrible time with the editing of this book. I'll just shortly say that when it was being copy edited, there were errors that were repeatedly introduced into the manuscript instead of being taken out. And I have since found out that this is actually more common than I thought that this happens. And it really raised all of my anxieties about this book. I just thought, you cannot have a book about writing in which there are these kinds of atrocious errors. And it just raised every fear I had about being criticized, about the book not being enough. And when I finally resolved that problem and got the first copy of the book, I said to Mr. Inkwell, I'm going to send this. I'm talking not the manuscript. I'm saying the book. Full on, the book is printed. It's in my hand.
Yeah.
I said, I'm going to send the book to the copy editor who finally cleaned everything up and make sure it's right. And he said to me, this book doesn't need to be criticized now. It's done. You brought your book into the world, and now it needs to be loved.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized that he was absolutely right on target about that. That whatever is not right about this book, whatever is imperfect, whatever I wanted to elaborate more, whatever mistake people find in it, this is the book I wrote. This is the book they published. And I think it's doing good things in the world. And so I have learned to be okay with all the things that aren't perfect about it.
Okay, I'm about to just blow your mind here, or maybe I've just blown my mind. I'm listening to you talk about this book, but I hear you talking about yourself.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay, because I get it, right? Like the whole writing and putting the book up there. Okay, fine. But all I hear is what's great about me. I had to really figure out what was great about me. I had to figure out what wasn't, and then accept all of it. And I had to just say, okay, you know what? Enough is enough. I am good enough. I'm out here. Love me because I deserve it.
Yeah.
Like I'm hearing like that. For me, the catharsis is right there.
Yeah.
Like you just spoke it beautifully. But
thank you.
About your book.
And I want to say also that this is one of those things that I think sounds pretty when you hear somebody else describe it, but it's not always pretty. When I find an error in that book, I cringe. I feel like I ache in across my shoulders and my chest. Like I might have to spend a few minutes or a few hours or a few days wrangling with those feelings, right? So I don't ever want to make it sound like it's this romantic end to the story that doesn't involve any real labor.
I'm listening.
It's work. If somebody comes out with another writing coach or academic comes out with a book on writing, my first thought is, oh my God, my book isn't going to be as good as theirs. It's like, it's all the time, constant work. But you get there, and to be able to love an imperfect thing and an imperfect self it feels like a gift to me. And also it is an ongoing gift that I think I at least have to give myself over and over again. And it's not a one-time thing. And that's what I want for anyone who reads the book or anyone who comes to Composed or has any kind of interaction with Inkwell, to be in love with their imperfect selves.
I'm just like smiling here again. You're saying all the great. I'm so serious because it's like, again, you're speaking so eloquently about this book, and I'm looking at your face, and I know that you're talking about the book, yes, but as most writers can attest to, whatever we put out there is just an extension of ourselves.
Yeah.
And when we're able to objectively and or subjectively look at all these things and speak on them in our truth, like that really is like the gift. That's the gift of writing. And that's, I think, why writing is such a healing situation. I know for like it's a healing thing. And I don't care what I'm writing, but it heals those parts that I didn't even realize were bruised. And I think it also shows us a lot of our bruises.
Yeah.
That we're not aware of.
Yeah. And it's funny. I wonder, because I was about to say, because I'm not a creative writer, but that's not true. Actually, I'm a creative writer. It's just that I'm not doing a lot of that now.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think people who I like primarily identify as academic writers, I wonder I wonder how it feels to me. You tell me what you think about this. It feels to me like when you're a creative writer, it's almost like the kind of what you're describing feels more accessible to creative writers, because I do think there's a body of thought around creative writing and a set of conversations about creative writing and a long history of like people writing about what does it mean to be a writer you have access to. And so you're dumped into this community of people who are really thinking of what writing can be for you. And I feel like academic writers, we don't get plunked down into that so much. And so what you're describing to me feels like a definite possibility for people, but it doesn't always become that for people. And I'm wondering if you think that's true, or am I romanticizing creative writers, that you all have more access to that than a research writer or an academic scholarly writer might have?
I don't think that we have more access to it as much as we allow ourselves to fall off the cliff and without the net, because I think there's more pressure to have it right. Like there's this thing of being like there's a right way to academically present information, and there's definitely a wrong way to academically present. But when you're a creative writer, it's and this is like research based, and don't ask me where I read it, but I wrote an article on it, just like the brain of creative writers. Like there's this, we don't have a lot of that critical part that's always, oh, this is wrong. That's wait, correct that. So we tap into the area that's more, just see what happens.
Yeah.
See how it works. And you go back and the critical part is on. But during the creative process, it's just go. And I don't know that academic writers give themselves the space to fall into that creativity as much as, and I could see why, obviously, but I think that's probably why academic writing may not be the healing source.
And it might not have, it has the same potential, I think. I actually think it has the same potential because, but maybe it doesn't. I think what I'm hearing you say is there's a way that the community of the history of, not history, quite the right word, but the tradition of creative writing and the community of creative writing encourage that kind of exploratory risk-taking, even though there is, of course, creative writers feel fear and get worried about the quality of their writing. But there's that way that's encouraged as part of the process.
Yeah.
And when you're learning the process of generating research, first of all, you're very rarely taught much about writing. So part of it is you're just doing it on your own. But then secondly, that kind of, I don't even know, it's not quite fancifulness, but just experimentation isn't necessarily encouraged, and that can get in the way or maybe slow down the. I wonder what other academics would say about this. I'm sure there's a bunch of academics also who are like, I don't need my stuff to be healing. I just want to write my stuff, and that's what they do. And then they're good with it.
But then my question is, why are you writing? What are you doing?
Oh, yeah. Okay. So I think this might be one difference, maybe, that we can name between. We're using these categories that aren't quite right, but academic and creative writer, is that academics want to contribute to the body of knowledge about a field. That's the place that we are trained to get to. It's about the body of knowledge that you're able to augment, that you're able to add to, that you are able to illustrate something that maybe no one else has illustrated before. The writing just happens to be the way they have to get that information. I don't think necessarily that people come to academia and say, oh, I want to be a writer. Those people become writers.
And they become writers. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think for a lot of people, writing is not what they want to do. And they might be good at it. They might be able to construct really strong arguments, but it might not be the act itself. I don't think they necessarily feel the way that you and I might feel about writing, which is, if somebody gives me 2 hours to write, I feel like they've just given me a pot of gold.
Yes.
And outside of the topic, it doesn't even matter what the topic is, just the writing.
Yeah.
I think that is not necessarily the case for every scholar, but the writing, that the form itself is the thing that they're most excited about. But ask them about their research and the thing that they know the most about, and they understand how these cells work together to generate this process, that you can't get them to shut up.
Okay.
I think the medium is not the issue necessarily with scholars, but the ideas and how it changes how we think about the world and what can be done with that knowledge, and how we can draw
the scholar hat is on, and
full is,
because you're like, oh, and it's the and the blah.
Absolutely.
I love it. You're like of both minds, and
it's true.
Yes, and I find that most writers are. I don't know any writer who isn't both analytical and asking all the questions and putting all the puzzle pieces together. Like that's where they get, ooh. And then also like the process and the opportunity to just put pen to paper. And so you are a writer.
I am.
Whatever you call yourself, you are a writer. Right?
100%. I fully identify as a writer. I never questioned that. I think I questioned what kind of writer I was, but yeah, I'm a writer. I lost that when I was in grad school. I forgot that I was a writer. And then once I realized it later on, and at some point when I was a faculty member, then I never let that go. That is who I am.
Yeah. And I think that's the big difference. I'm going to go out on my limb and say that's the big difference is that you have scholars who are writers. I love is that a mason jar? I'm all
yeah.
Definitely going to have to edit that. Yeah, I have those. Yeah, that's what we've been better. Okay, anywho, I'm sorry. It's a good size. Anyway, but yeah, I'm going to go out on my little limb and I'm going to say that's probably the difference. You have writers who become scholars, right? They do all of that, but they're still writers. And then you have scholars who have to write. And so I'm going to make that distinction just for me and people who aren't in academia. Like you have writers who are, I'm going to write regardless. I don't care what I'm writing about. I just happen to also love this one field and I'm pouring it in here. But then, of course, like you said, if you talk with scholars who aren't necessarily writers, you talk about their stuff, then it's on and popping.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think I'm going to move on because I need to ask you something.
All righty.
Gave you the audacity to say, I'm not only going to go to college and do this, and I'm not only going to get my PhD and do this, I'm not only going to make tenure because, look, I know how hard it is to make tenure.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm just going to leave it at that. I have writer friends who are going for tenure, and they're just like, girl.
Yeah.
And I'm like, if I wasn't already bald, I'd be bald worrying about you and what you're going through. So it's like, what gave you the audacity to seek PhD, become tenured, and then say, you know what, I'm going to walk away. And have other people really get their scholarly writing on. What gave you the audacity to say, I can do this?
Yeah. Okay. A couple different things. One, something we've been talking about this whole time, which is other people, my community. When I first started expressing to the chair of my department and the dean of my college and colleagues and friends that I was just not happy being an academic and I wanted to do something else. Oh, of course, at first they were horrified because I had just had a very successful tenure case and everything went well. And they didn't understand. And then at the end of the day, they just supported me. And they made it possible for me to find institutional space to think through what I was doing. I was able to take positions that provided me a little release from teaching. And instead I was doing some administrative work. And so they didn't, I don't know that anybody fully ever understood. Because they didn't even understand at that point. Why was I so unhappy when I apparently had everything that I'd been working for at that point, 15 years?
Yeah.
15, 20 years. So it was that included my family who were also like, you want to do what? But they still supported me. So I think that I just had people around me who believed in me. And even when the choices I was making didn't make sense to them. So that was one thing.
Okay.
I do also want to name privilege. It's really important to name that I had a lot of class privilege. There's no way I would have started Inkwell if I had not been married to someone who had a job with health insurance. There's just no way.
Yeah.
And I want to name that because people often come to me and say, oh, it's so amazing that you did this. You're so like brave. And I'm like, yeah, easy to be brave with a safety net. Okay. So let's just be clear. And I met other women entrepreneurs who did not have a safety net and I saw what their day-to-day was like. And so I just want to say that's part of what was happening for me.
Yeah. Thank you for acknowledging that. Seriously.
Yeah.
Thank you for acknowledging that.
Yeah, that's really important.
Yeah.
I want to say the lovely thing, one of the many lovely things about being a faculty member is you actually do have some space to try some things out. So when I say that I first started leading retreats when I was at my university, I did that for 3 years and we ran 3 retreats a year. And so by the time I came out of that experience, I was very clear that I wanted to do this. B was even more clear that I was good at it. And C had some experience in doing it. And so often scholars will come to me and say, oh, I think I want to leave academia. What should I do? And I'm like, stay and do that thing you want to do in the summer, or do it in your class, or do it on the side for your grad students. Like whatever it is, use the autonomy and control over your time that you have to do a little bit less of all that administrative labor and all that committee work, and instead try out your idea. I also had models for doing it because there was someone in my department who also had left and started their own coaching for academics company. So I had this it's a very different type of business. It does very different things, but I had this as a model. And so I think having someone who's done what you want to do and you can both look at the example and also occasionally reach out to that person. That person was also really very generous in inviting me to give workshops that introduced me to the people that they were working for. And they had huge audience, an email list with thousands of people on it. And so I feel like yes, I worked very hard. I still work very hard. I want to work 4 hours a day, not 10 hours a day. And I struggle with that all the time and not trying to. I had this idea I was really excited about, and I loved doing the work. And I got mad when I was asked to do my real job, which said to me, there's this thing that feels like the perfect combination of all the things I love. And so I worked for that, and I struggled with that, and I didn't know what I was doing, and taught myself how to do things that you have to teach yourself how to do when you run a business. And so I did all those things, and I did them in a container of support and privilege and access to resources that not everybody has. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
So that's that's what Audacity is, right? Audacity isn't only internal. It is cultivated and it's encouraged by the environment that we're in. And that was true for me.
Yeah, I think so. And just, again, hearing you talk about the support and then the privilege. I think the support is the privilege, right? Like the privilege of having support, right? Because so many people are like, I have this big dream. I have this idea. I want to do something that nobody in my family's ever done before. And that's it. That's where it is, because they don't have any of the support system. I think that may very well be one of the best Audacity answers I've gotten, seriously, because I'm like, I think, the privilege. The privilege is my Audacity. I had one writer tell me that got her Audacity because she just first to move through the world like a mediocre white man. I didn't see, you had that one moment where you were like, did she say what I thought? That was my immediate, I said, oh my God, that's the best thing I've ever heard. And I said, okay, it works. It works. Yeah, she was straight. Wow. So I do want to get into your book.
Yes.
Just a little bit. Just a little bit.
Okay.
Do you have a copy of your book?
I do have a copy of the book with me. Are you going to point me to some pages?
No, I'm going to ask you to find something in your book that you absolutely adore. Something that really speaks to all writers, not just scholarly writers. And read a little bit.
How long is a little bit? Tell me what length of time you're looking for.
Okay. Did you get that?
I got it.
Very good. Very good.
Okay. I have 2 possibilities here, I think.
Okay.
One, you know what? Can I throw out the possibilities to you and you help me decide? Can we do that?
Yeah.
Okay. So one part is, it's actually the preface. which is part probably where I talk the most about my own experience, which is why I think it can be helpful to hear.
Okay.
And then on that page, I don't know, how do people say XI? Do they just say XI when they're naming the pages that are in Roman numerals, or do they say Roman numeral 6? Anyway, it's Roman numeral 6.
Yeah, Roman
you,
numeral
Ella.
6. Thank you so much.
And then
Appreciate it.
there's another section where starts on page 23, and it talks about how one of the ways that scholars can feel the emotional toll of writing. And I like to talk about this partly because it can be such a relief to hear what other people, that even the other people are feeling what you feel.
Yes.
So I don't know, either one. And I go from page 23 to maybe 25, but I excerpt out a lot of it. So does either one of those seem more interesting?
I say let's give it both.
Let's start with one and then you let me know.
Yeah. I love to hear the preface, Brad. Okay. And then I think Be Still My Heart, the emotional toll of writing. I think it's just so important because that's my wheelhouse. We've been talking about that. So yeah, definitely.
Yeah. All right, I'll start with the preface.
Thank you.
At the time, I didn't appreciate how powerful it was, that first little sliver of doubt. How quietly it flipped into my head, that first day on Northwestern's campus, just before the start of classes. I'd gotten into several graduate programs, all of which offered me funding, and I should have been feeling invincible. But as I walked beneath the canopy of trees toward the library, the only brown-skinned person around, a thought wormed its way into my head that had never before occurred to me, not once, in all the time I'd been in school. What if my high school teachers were right? What if going to an HBCU hadn't prepared me? What if I wasn't good enough? That doubt sat silently inside, biding its time. It didn't bother to announce itself. It didn't need to. Instead, it waited and grew. Every time I fumbled through a department reception, bungling an interaction with a faculty member. Every time I sat in a seminar, fumbling for something smart to say, but not understanding what everyone was talking about, and too embarrassed to ask. Every time I sat down to write a paper, struggled with what to say, and wondered why no one else in my cohort had this problem. By the time I got to prelims, the doubt had grown larger than me and converted itself from a question into an assertion. "Oh no, honey," it said with every word I wrote. "I don't know what you were thinking, but you are definitely not good enough." This book is for any scholar who's ever felt that way about themselves and their writing. It's for students who began graduate school brimming with a confidence that somehow reached out over the years. It's for faculty who are filled with dread when they think of writing, but have to hide it from both their students and their colleagues. It is especially for women of color and other marginalized scholars whose struggles with writing have prompted them to internalize the bias that others have about their ability to do exemplary research. What Becoming offers all of you is something I wish I'd had that first day of graduate school. It offers an explanation of why writing is so hard for all of us. It offers an analysis of the conditions that make it harder for some than for others. And it offers a strategy for uncovering a hidden bank of knowledge you already have that can help make writing easier.
Thank you for joining us on the Black Writer Therapy Podcast. Don't forget to follow, subscribe, and download our episodes. To my aspiring writers, remember, this is a journey, and every rewrite takes you closer to where you desire to be. And our industry allies, let's keep those gates open, shall we? The Black Writer Therapy Podcast is accepting requests for affinity collaborative partnerships. Contact Vicki Finkley Brown if your company or organization is interested in participating. I'm Ella Shawn. host and unlicensed therapist of the Black Writer Therapy Podcast, reminding you to be kindest to yourself first, always and in all ways. Until next week. In a world where shadows dance and secrets lurk, comes an unforgettable saga of broken souls, written by Alashan. Get ready to embark on a gripping journey through time, a dark Southern coming-of-age saga that spans over 30 years. Nothing is as it seems. With every turn of the page, secrets unravel, revealing a web of intrigue that will leave you breathless. Breaking is the easy part. Having the courage to look into the mirror of your souls, allowing yourself to be consecrated, to rise harmoniously in alignment with self and the universe, that's the hard part. Join John and Vivian on this unforgettable journey where shattered souls rise, courage is tested, and destinies are forged. The Broken Souls series by Alashan, a gripping 4-book masterpiece that will keep you captivated till the very end. Don't miss your chance to experience this compelling tale of love, loss, and redemption. Purchase your copy now and be prepared to have your soul shattered. Because sometimes the darkest paths lead to the brightest light.